Outlaws abduct a rancher's wife, only to learn they've messed with the wrong gunslinger. When the ruthless Devil's Mayhem gang storms a quiet ranch, they believe they've captured a helpless woman to use as leverage. But Victoria Lawson is no ordinary rancher's wife. Before settling into country life, she was Agent Victoria Blackwood, one of MI6's most lethal operatives. As her husband, a retired Delta Force sniper, races to find her, Victoria taps into the deadly skills of her past. What unfolds is a high-stakes battle of wits, survival, and vengeance, proving that the outlaws have made a fatal mistake. They didn't just abduct a rancher's wife, they awakened a warrior. Welcome back. Before we start, remember to hit the like and subscribe for the new stories every day. The setting sun painted long shadows across the rolling hills of Clearwater County, casting the modest ranch house in a golden glow that belied the darkness about to descend upon it. Victoria Lawson stood at the kitchen window, her weathered hands submerged in soapy water as she gazed out at the sprawling landscape she and her husband Robert had poured their lives into for the past 7 years. At 45, the fine lines around her eyes told stories of both laughter and hardship, while her posture, straight-backed and vigilant even in moments of apparent relaxation, hinted at a life lived before the ranch, a life few in these parts knew anything about. At her feet lay Bandit, an aging German shepherd with a distinctive white patch over one eye. His ears perked up suddenly, head lifting from his paws as he fixed his gaze toward the long, winding driveway. Victoria noticed immediately, her hands stilling in the dishwater. "What is it, old boy?" she murmured. Bandit's muscles tensed beneath her touch, a low growl building in his chest. The distant rumble reached her ears moments later, motorcycles, several of them. Robert wasn't due back from town for hours yet. A flutter of unease settled in her stomach as the approaching headlights appeared like predatory eyes piercing the dusk. "Up," she commanded softly, and Bandit immediately rose, pressing against her leg. Victoria moved swiftly to the gun cabinet, but before she could reach for the rifle, the front door burst open with such force that it tore one hinge completely free. 5 men stood in her doorway, leather-clad and imposing, their faces partially hidden behind bandanas. The Devil's Mayhem Motorcycle Club. She recognized the insignia emblazoned on their jackets immediately. "Mrs. Lawson," the leader stepped forward, his voice muffled behind the fabric. "I believe it's time you and your husband reconsidered our offer." Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly, her expression betraying nothing of the calculations racing through her mind. "I'm afraid my husband isn't here," she replied evenly. "And any offers regarding our land need to go through proper channels." Bandit positioned himself between Victoria and the intruders, hackles raised. One of the men laughed harshly. "That's the problem with you and your husband," the leader continued. "You don't seem to understand we are the proper channels in this county now." He nodded to the men behind him. "Grab her. And the dog. Touch my dog and it'll be the last thing you do." Victoria's voice had changed, the gentle lilt of the rancher's wife evaporating like morning dew under a scorching sun. Something in her tone made even the hardened criminals hesitate. The leader recovered quickly, pulling a gun from his waistband. "How about you call off your mutt, or I put him down right here?" Victoria's gaze held steady, assessing. These men were confident, organized, but not professional soldiers. The way they held their weapons, their stance, they were dangerous, but undisciplined. She had faced far worse. "Bandit, back," she commanded, and the loyal shepherd retreated to her side, though his growl never ceased. "Smart choice." The leader motioned with his gun. "You're coming with us, Mrs. Lawson. Your husband needs to learn what happens when he stands in the way of progress." As they forced her onto the back of a motorcycle, she caught sight of Bandit watching from the doorway, trembling with the effort of obeying her last command to stay. "Run," she whispered, just before the motorcycles roared to life. The shepherd hesitated only a moment before bolting into the darkness, toward the neighboring property where old Sam Whitaker, a retired vet and longtime friend of the Lawsons, would recognize him and understand something was terribly wrong. As the motorcycles tore down the driveway, Victoria closed her eyes briefly. These men had no idea what they had just done. They thought they had captured a helpless rancher's wife. What they didn't know, what almost no one in Clearwater County knew, was that Victoria Lawson had spent 15 years as Agent Victoria Blackwood, one of the most effective covert operatives MI6 had ever produced. And now, as the wind whipped her graying chestnut hair, Victoria felt the old instincts awakening, a sleeping predator rousing at the scent of danger. These men had made a grave mistake, not because they had angered her husband, but because they had unwittingly pulled the tigress back into the hunt. Sam Whitaker was sitting on his porch when Bandit came tearing across his property, barking frantically. The former Army veterinarian recognized the German Shepherd immediately. Bandit? What the devil? Sam stood, his arthritic knees protesting. The dog circled him, barking insistently, then ran several paces back toward the Lawson property before returning to tug at Sam's pant leg. Sam hesitated only briefly before dialing Sheriff Mitchell's number. Dale? It's Sam Whitaker. Victoria Lawson might be in trouble. The sheriff promised to send a deputy when one became available, which might not be until morning. Looks like it's just as thin. Boy, Sam said, retrieving his shotgun and the keys to his pickup truck. Let's go see what's got you so spooked. At the Lawson Ranch, Sam found the front door hanging askew, boot prints tracked across the clean floor, and a scrap of leather with the Devil's Mayhem insignia. He called Robert immediately, telling him to return to the ranch. Don't you worry, boy, Sam said softly to Bandit, who pressed his head against the old man's knee. If there's one thing I learned about your mistress over the years, it's that she's not as fragile as she looks. And your master, well, those fools have no idea who they're dealing with. The Devil's Mayhem Clubhouse was an old converted warehouse with elaborate security measures. Inside, Victoria counted 18 men total, though only 12 wore full member patches. The leader, who had removed his bandana to reveal a face prematurely aged by hard living, introduced himself as Ace. Mrs. Lawson, he said, leaning against a desk, your husband has been particularly stubborn about selling that land of yours. Land that, as it happens, we have significant interest in. Victoria noted crates of ammunition partially hidden under tarps and a ledger showing shipping manifest with coded entries she could easily decipher. This was no small-time operation. How long have you been moving weapons through Clearwater County? She asked quietly. Ace stiffened. You've got quite an imagination for a rancher's wife. The security here is excessive for a local motorcycle club, Victoria continued. And your men move with military precision, despite their lack of formal training. You're middle management in a larger operation, aren't you? For a moment, Ace looked genuinely rattled. You talk too much. We'll see if your husband is more reasonable when he realizes we have you. If you let me go now and leave Clearwater County for good, I won't have to hurt you, Victoria stated calmly. Ace's smile faltered at her absolute certainty. Lock her in the storeroom, he barked at one of his men. And search her. Thoroughly. The young man who approached had nervous eyes and trembling hands. As he patted her down, Victoria appeared more frightened than she felt. Please, she whispered. I have a heart condition. I need my medication. The recruit hesitated, then allowed her to take a pill from her case. Victoria discreetly planted a tiny tracking device in the lining of his jacket. As she was locked in the storeroom, Victoria smiled faintly to herself. The tracker would activate in 30 minutes, sending a signal to a satellite receiver she and Robert had installed when they first moved to the ranch, a precaution from a life she had never fully left behind. Robert Lawson's truck tore down the country roads at breakneck speed. At 52, Robert's face bore the weathered lines of a man who had spent most of his life outdoors, his brown hair now streaked with silver. But beneath the rancher's exterior lay the sharp mind and honed instincts of a man who had spent 20 years in Delta Force. It was during a joint operation in Eastern Europe that he had first encountered Victoria Blackwood, or rather, she had encountered him, appearing like a phantom in his secure hotel room to warn him of a compromised mission. When they had finally retired, they had chosen the ranch as their haven, a place where they could live quietly while maintaining the vigilance that had kept them alive all those years. At the ranch, Sam showed Robert the leather scrap with the Devil's Mayhem insignia. They'd been causing trouble for months, but this is something else. I know where their clubhouse is, Robert said grimly. He moved to the barn, pulling back a false panel to reveal a hidden compartment containing a black case. Inside lay a disassembled sniper rifle, handguns, and tactical gear, remnants of a life he had supposedly left behind. The satellite phone showed Victoria's signal clearly inside the clubhouse. If I'm not back with Victoria by morning, Robert told Sam, call this number. Don't tell them anything except that Phoenix and Ghost need extraction. Sam placed a weathered hand on Robert's shoulder. Those boys have no idea who they're messing with, do they? No, Robert replied, Bandit waiting alertly by his side. But they're about to find out. In the storeroom, Victoria was gathering intelligence when a young club member named Tyler brought her water. She recognized his reluctance immediately. You're new to this, aren't you? Victoria asked gently. You seem uncertain. It wasn't supposed to be like this, Tyler admitted. When I got back from Afghanistan, I couldn't adjust. The club seemed like brotherhood, structure. But lately they've moved from motorcycle enthusiasts to arms dealers, Victoria finished. This isn't about our ranch, is it? What does Ace really want with our land? Before Tyler could answer, chaos erupted from the main room. The sound of breaking glass and gunfire. Victoria disarmed the young man in one fluid motion. I meant what I said about protection, she told him calmly. But right now, you need to tell me exactly who Ace is working for. Robert had neutralized the exterior guards with practiced efficiency, using Bandit to create a diversion. Inside, he discovered weapons crates confirming his suspicions that this was no ordinary motorcycle club. When the clubhouse plunged into darkness after Robert cut the power, he moved swiftly to the room where Victoria's signal originated. She emerged with gun in hand, Tyler following behind her. For outside, neutralized, Robert reported quietly. How many inside? 11 in the main room. 3 more in the operations center toward the back, Victoria replied. This is bigger than we thought, Robert. The ranch sits atop abandoned mining tunnels perfect for moving illegal weapons across state lines. And Marcus Drake is running the operation. Robert's jaw tightened at the name. A former CIA operative turned arms dealer responsible for the deaths of 3 members of his Delta Force team in Syria. Deputy Sheriff Jackson Crawford is Drake's right-hand man, Tyler added. That's why no one investigates them. Victoria discovered that Deputy Director Crawford of Homeland Security, Jackson's uncle, was protecting the operation from federal investigation. As she downloaded evidence from the main computer, an alarm blared through the clubhouse. Gunfire erupted as Ace and his men spotted Robert. Victoria grabbed the flash drive containing the evidence, and they fought their way to a rear exit, with Bandit taking down one of the gunmen. Outside, vehicles were approaching with reinforcements. We split up, Victoria decided. Robert, take Tyler and the evidence to Sam. I'll create a diversion with Bandit, then circle back to the ranch. Before Robert could protest, she kissed him quickly. Phoenix and Ghost, one last mission, she whispered. Trust me. 24 hours, he said. Then I come looking. With a command to Bandit, Victoria disappeared into the shadows, the shepherd moving silently at her side. Victoria returned to the ranch just before dawn, a shallow cut across her cheekbone, the only visible injury. Robert pulled her into a brief, fierce embrace before confirming that her old handler, Margaret, had arranged for teams to move on Crawford's location and Drake's other distribution points using the evidence they'd gathered. Tyler's in protective custody, Robert added. He made the right choice, thanks to you. Victoria noticed property listings spread across the table. What's all this? I think it might be time for a change of scenery, Robert explained. Montana. Sam's nephew has a ranch there, more remote. Good place to truly retire. Victoria gazed out the window at the sunrise painting their land in gold. She felt a surprising pang at the thought of leaving the sanctuary they had built. I need to check on the horses, she said, moving toward the door with Bandit following faithfully. In the stable, as Victoria stroked Starlight's velvet nose, she found her thoughts drifting to Tyler, the lost young man who'd found himself caught up in something far darker than he'd ever imagined. She recognized something of herself in him, the same search for belonging that had led her into MI6. Robert joined her, offering a steaming mug. You're thinking about the boy. He reminded me of myself at that age, Victoria admitted. Searching for purpose, belonging. We've spent our lives fighting shadows, Robert said gently. Perhaps it's time we focused on bringing people into the light instead. He explained that Sam's nephew ran a program for veterans struggling to reintegrate into civilian life. He's been asking Sam to join him, bring his veterinary experience. Said he could use a couple with our background too. Before Victoria could respond, 3 black SUVs pulled into their yard. Margaret Chun, Victoria's former handler, emerged from the lead vehicle. Agent Blackwood, Margaret called, using the name Victoria hadn't answered to in 7 years. You certainly haven't lost your touch for stirring up hornets' nests. Margaret explained that Crawford had been arrested along with 17 others, though Drake remained at large. The information you provided goes deeper than we initially thought. There are connections to terrorist cells in 3 countries, money laundering operations through seemingly legitimate businesses, including the Clearwater Banking Group that's been trying to foreclose on half the ranches in the county. And now you need our help, Robert stated. Not officially, of course, Margaret replied smoothly. You're both retired. but as consultants, sharing your unique knowledge of the area and of Drake's methods. Victoria looked at their ranch house, bathed in morning light. For 7 years, they had called this place home, had slowly built a life that was their own. And now, once more, the shadows of their past had found them. "I need to make a call first," Victoria said finally. "There's a young man in protective custody who deserves to know what's happening." As Margaret returned to her vehicle, Robert touched Victoria's arm. "You're thinking of bringing Tyler in. He deserves a chance, Robert. The same chance we got when our handlers saw something in us worth saving." Victoria's eyes held fierce determination. "And if we're going to do this, consult on bringing Drake down once and for all. I want it to mean something beyond just another mission." Robert smiled slowly. "Montana will still be there after we finish this. And maybe by then, we'll have a few more strays to bring along." 6 months later, Whispering Pines Ranch, Montana. The autumn air carried a crisp edge as Victoria stood on the wide porch, watching the golden light play across the sprawling pastures. In the nearest paddock, Tyler worked with a young veteran, a girl barely 20 who had returned from Afghanistan with haunted eyes. Together, they were gentling a rescue horse, building trust with each careful touch. Bandit lay at Victoria's feet, watchful even in his relaxation. Despite his advancing years, he had adapted to their new home with remarkable resilience, becoming a beloved fixture among the veterans who came to Whispering Pines seeking healing. Robert emerged with steaming mugs, settling beside her. "Drake's trial date is set," he said quietly. "The evidence is overwhelming. They're confident he'll never see the outside of a prison again." Victoria nodded, remembering how their consulting work had culminated in tracking Drake to South America. The mission had nearly cost Robert his life when Drake triggered explosives throughout his compound. Only Bandit's warning bark had given Robert the crucial moments needed to reach safety. "It's really over, Victoria. Is it ever really over?" she asked softly, her gaze returning to Tyler and the young veteran. The woman was smiling now, a rare sight, as the Mustang tentatively nuzzled her outstretched hand. "No," Robert admitted, "but maybe that's not such a bad thing. The work we do here, it matters in a different way." In the 6 months since they had helped bring down Drake's operation, Whispering Pines had transformed. Robert's military connections and Victoria's understanding of psychological trauma had attracted funding and support, allowing them to expand their program for veterans struggling to find their footing in civilian life. A truck appeared on the long driveway, Agent Donovan, bringing their newest arrival, a former Marine sniper suffering from severe PTSD. "I'll get his cabin ready," Victoria said. "You and Bandit greet him?" Robert nodded, understanding that the sight of a man and his dog would be less threatening to their new guest than a woman he didn't know. As Robert and Bandit made their way toward the approaching vehicle, Victoria paused to watch them. Her husband's stride was slightly uneven now, a souvenir from their final confrontation with Drake, but his shoulders remained straight, his purpose clear. Beside him, Bandit moved with the dignified pace of an aging soldier still devoted to his duty. "Ghost to Phoenix," came Robert's voice through the radio at her hip, their old code names now an affectionate private language. "Our new guest has arrived, and he's brought a friend." "What kind of friend?" Victoria asked. "The four-legged kind," Robert replied, amusement in his voice. "A three-legged German shepherd who refuses to leave his side. Looks like Bandit might have a new protege." Victoria smiled, her gaze sweeping across the ranch, their new home, their new mission, their new beginning. "I'm on my way," she responded. Sam joined her on the porch, having spotted the new arrival. "Another lost soul?" Victoria turned to look at the old veterinarian who had become family. "Aren't we all, in one way or another?" Sam's weathered face creased in a smile. "Not lost anymore, I'd say. Just finding a different path home." As Victoria walked beside Sam toward the newest member of their unconventional family, she felt a profound sense of rightness. The Devil's Mayhem Motorcycle Club had indeed abducted the wrong rancher's wife that fateful night. Not because her husband was a deadly gunslinger, but because in trying to exploit what they perceived as weakness, they had unwittingly awakened two warriors who understood that true strength lay not in violence, but in healing, not in revenge, but in redemption. And as the sun began its descent behind the mountains, Victoria Lawson, once known as the Ghost, walked forward into the light, toward the life she and Robert had finally, truly found. A life where their most important mission wasn't taking down targets, but building up broken spirits. Where aging dogs with battle scars found purpose in guiding younger souls through their own darkness. Where, at last, they had found their way home.